National Poetry Month. I hope you all knew that. And it's something we always celebrate at Porterville College. But we're not alone. This is a huge celebration. So I want to read to you the statement from the Academy of American Poets about National Poetry Month. National Poetry Month, established by the Academy of American Poets in 1996, is the largest literary celebration in the world, with tens of millions of readers, students, K-12 teachers, librarians, booksellers, literary events curators, right? Publishers, bloggers, and of course poets, marking poetry's important place in our culture and our lives every April. And this is April, so here we are. And by the way, because I always forget to introduce myself, I'm Anne Marie Wagstaff. I'm the chair of the Language Arts Division at Porterville College. And as part of our celebration of National Poetry Month, the first thing we'd like to do is to acknowledge and honor two luminary poets who've died in the last 2 years. And we open then with Melissa Long reading a poem by Philip Levine and Catherine Hodges reading a poem by C.D. Wright.
Thank you. I'm Melissa Black, and I will be reading What Work Is. This is Philip Levine's National Book Award winner. And I'm really pleased to see everybody turned out tonight to hear these different works and all of these different readers. So this poem is called Monsieur Degas Teaches Art and Science at Durfee Intermediate School, Detroit, 1942. He made a line on the blackboard, one bold stroke from right to left, diagonally, downward, and stood back to ask, looking as always at no one in particular, what have I done? From the back of the room, Freddie shouted, you've broken a piece of chalk. Monsieur Degas did not smile. What have I done? He repeated. The most intellectual students looked down to study their desks, except for Gertrude Bimler, who raised her hand before she spoke. Monsieur Degas, you have created the hypotenuse of an isosceles triangle. Degas mused. Everyone knew that Gertrude could not be incorrect. It is possible, Louis Warshawski added precisely, that you have begun to represent the roof of a barn. I remember that it was exactly 20 minutes past 11, and I thought at worst this would go on another 40 minutes. It was early April. The snow had all but melted on the playgrounds. The elms and maples bordering the cracked walks shivered in the new winds. And I believed that before I knew it, I'd be swaggering to the candy store for a Milky Way. Monsieur Degas pursed his lips, and the room stilled until the long hand of the clock moved to 21, as though in complicity with Gertrude, who added confidently, you've begun to separate the dark from the dark. I looked back for help, but now the trees bucked and quaked, and I knew this could go on forever. Philip Levine was the first member of his family to earn a college degree, and he was a significant force in poetry. He wrote over 18 books, and he unfailingly championed working people. He taught at Fresno State for over 30 years, and he won pretty much every major award in poetry, including the Pulitzer Prize, and as I already mentioned, the National Book Award. He died February 14th of 2015. So, next.
And C.D. Wright died very unexpectedly in January of this year. Went to sleep and didn't wake up. She was only 67. She was married to the poet Forrest Gander, and together they taught poetry at Brown University. C.D. Wright is a singular voice. We have a number of her volumes in our library, and I would commend them to you. She is not an easy poet to read, and we don't go to her when we want to be soothed necessarily. Her beauty is a beauty of strangeness and of precision, and we go to her to be intellectually and morally challenged. I'm going to read an excerpt from a long poem called, I won't be reading all of it, but I'll read sections of it for you. Our Dust, C.D. Wright. I am your ancestor. You know next to nothing about me. There is no reason for you to imagine the rooms I occupied or my heavy hair. I was the poet of shadow work and towns with quarter-inch phone books, of failed roadside zoos, the poet of yard eggs and sharpening shops, jobs at the weapons plant and the Maybelline factory on the Penitentiary Road. A poet of spiderwort and jacks in the pulpit, hollyhocks against the tool shed, an unsmiling dark blonde, the one with the trowel in her handbag. I was the poet of short-tailed cats and yellow line paint, of satellite dishes and Peterbilt trucks, red man chewing tobacco, black cat fireworks, triple hut cream soda, also of dirt daubers, night crawlers, Martin houses, honey, and whetstones. The poet of good walking shoes, a necessity in vernacular parts, and push mowers. The rumor that I was once seen sleeping in a refrigerator box is false, nor was I the one lunching at the governor's mansion. Believe me, I am not being modest when I admit my life doesn't bear repeating. I agreed to be the poet of one life, one death alone. I have seen myself in the black car. I have seen the retreat of the black car. C.D. Wright.
If you saw one of the flyers or the posters for tonight's event, it referred to familiar faces. We're going to also read a poem. And so now we're moving on to our familiar face section of the poetry reading. We'll have 3 faculty members at Porterville College reading and speaking briefly about one poem each that they would like to share with you. And speaking first is Jim Ince from Art, and then Catherine Benander from English, and then Anne-Marie Wagstaff also from English.
This poem that I'm going to read begin with some research that I had done for a series of writing and painting on the region where I live, the Cuya River drainage in the foothills of the Sierras, kind of bioregional approach. I looked at everything from this area, including quite some research on the Native Americans in this area. I found something interesting. Lake Cuya, the dam, is over a burial site for the Wachoni Yokuts. And so the poem came out of this experience. It starts with Yokuts' words and it ends with them, and so I will do my best. But first, it's called Requiem. It starts with the Yokut's prayer, which ends in this way. My words are tied in one with the great mountains, with great rocks, with the great trees. In one with my body and my heart, do you all help me with supernatural power, and you day and you night. All of you see me, one with this world. From the Way We Lived, edited by Malcolm Margolin. A large graveyard lies under Lake Kauai, once the place of a Yokats-Wauchumni village. A dam made a lake of the river and buried the site under a sea of water. Previously, these peaceful people settled these lands for countless years before waves of white conquerors carrying disease broke upon them, leaving ashes, until all the Wauchumni world lay in ruin. So in time, a dam comes to bury a graveyard, as the sea once covered the Sierras, a range from the ocean floor. Utsnumi was the name of this Wauchumni village, this early site of bear dance, deer dance, beaver dance, and rattlesnake ritual. Entombed by water, these basket makers, finest of their kind, these effigy makers for their mourning ceremony, these hunters and gatherers with stone song and earth words, cemented the sense into this sense of place. These people, like any other, first named this region, first walked and first danced on this rolling land and built their home here. Now by weight of water, their liquid grave becomes for them a late and rare requiem, because Yokats-Wauchumni gave water many names. Water singing, Tomu da Edik, water still, Yongmu da Edik, water shining, Waha Munda Adik, water shallow, Ata Adik, water deep, Wa'a Adik. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Benander, and I want to first thank Catherine for strong-arming me into reading one of my poems. Out of 27 years of teaching, I've read 2 of my poems in public, so if I look like I'm about to freak out, you know why. I thought today that you might be interested to know how poems are made, at least by some of us. And William Carlos Williams, who's a famous poet, he said that poems could be made, could be created, could be built, like you would build a house or forge something or create something with your hands. So I don't, other than the writing, think you're actually creating it with your hands, but I like the imagery of that, I like the idea of that. And so I walk around often with little slips of paper that I have written poetry on, and sometimes I lose them, sometimes on purpose. Sometimes I find them 3 or 5 or 10 years later, and I think, ooh, who wrote that? And then I realize it was me. I think that maybe part of my brain likes to put them away, and then when I come back to them, I can be okay with them, but at the time, I don't want to see them again for a while. So I wrote a poem about that. That was inspired by Catherine's proximity to my office and the fact that we were talking about poetry. And I actually wrote it on a phone number that my husband had written down for a phone call that he had to make while I was waiting for my daughter in the parking lot of her school. I think it's a good way to think about where poetry happens, in sort of crevices of our lives. It is called Inductive Notebook. Each is a fragment of the puzzle I used to call therapy. But now I know a simple denial. I keep organized just out of reach, in plain sight, in a random drawer, in a box meant for a ring or some other precious item. Each scrap a memory with form, scratching surfaces of the microscope that clarifies a truth to behold and then hide. Thank you.
Well, I consider myself an occasional poet in many ways, meaning that I only write poetry occasionally, and also that I write it for an occasion. The kind of strange thing is that I often don't know what the occasion is. So I write the poem, and maybe a decade later I get it, okay? So this was also written for this occasion. I hadn't written a poem in quite a while, and we were planning this, and we were all freaking out and saying, well, who else would be willing to stand up? And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a poem. And ultimately, I did. So it is sort of for this occasion, but it's also for an occasion that I don't know what it is yet, okay? I have some clues, okay? It's dedicated to Juna Barnes, who is the author about whom I wrote my dissertation some, I don't know, 30 years ago, who changed my life in many ways. So here's the poem. Alchemy of Grace for Juna Barnes. Out of the blue, strange as a pear grows on a tree, turning water into wood, absence wakes from dawn flight, homing to the cell in 4 directions, sparrow, joy, raven, crow. Up from the earth one pear tree grows, leapfrog out of season, image sharp, symbol fat, solitary sign in polywog conversion. Daybreak must not find her out. Hooded grace sits in dark monk's cell. Tectonic breath rattles household silence, plates, forks, earth cracks, sea floor free, bobbing salmon, algae, oyster, pearl. None awakes in London, Paris, Dresden, Greenwich. Veiled in ash, traces orders, westward wailing squeezes dawn through resurrection crack in time. Parachutes blossom, we all fall down, awake, alive. And now we go on to our 2 featured poets. They have written introductions and that I will read to you to introduce them. But before I do that, let me say that we in language arts at Porterville College and in this community are very honored and blessed to have these 2 poets in our midst. And it's not just a matter of writing poetry, it's a way of seeing the world, hearing the world, tasting the world, touching the world, and helping us to hear, see, feel differently because they're among us. Poets in general, and these 2 in specifically. So we thank them, and very, very happy to have them here to read tonight. So Melissa Martell Black is a professor of English here at Porterville College. Before coming to Porterville College, she spent 7 years working for the Poetry Center and American Poetry Archives in San Francisco. Her poems have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Melissa is also working with photographer Matt Black on the Geography of Poverty, a digital documentary project that combines geotagged photographs with census data to create a modern portrait of poverty in the United States, to explore, document, and spark discussion about contemporary poverty and growing income inequality. This ongoing project is featured on msnbc.com. And now, Melissa Black.
Thank you very much. Well, Jim mentioned the dam that's above Lemon Cove, and I'm going to read to you tonight from a manuscript called Terminus, which is the dam. And I started this project during the Great Recession, and I was watching the community that I was living in, Lemon Cove, basically disintegrate. Families broke up, There were kids living in an RV that was parked on the street next door. Power cords ran across lawns. I'm inspired by the work of others who have written about social issues that needed in their time to be fixed. Most notably Muriel Rukeyser's US 1, which was published in 1938. Philip Levine's Not This Pig from 1968, plus most of his other work. Carolyn Forshay's The Country Between Us from 1982, and the writings of Tilly Olson. So I'm going to read you 9 pieces from Terminus. It's broken into 3 parts. It's broken into 3 parts. The first part is called Everything Is Here. Found poem, 1868. No part of the civilized world presents rarer inducements for settlement or occupation to men of enterprise, capital, and industry than the area embraced in this review. The larger breadth of the country is unoccupied and undeveloped. The mineral resources are inexhaustible. The manufacturing facilities unsurpassed. The climate salubrious. And everything is here to make a great country. Welcome home. Each time around the curve, you can't help but imagine going too fast just once. Crashing spectacular in metal and fire into historic hotel or historic gas station or historic house that is your own place, wrapped in dark shingles. Pull under the pecan, past grapevines and tall ivied fence, pull into your time here. Trees with ghosts, shacks painted like candy, celadon, lilac, sky blue. Some only a fresh facade, sides peeling from sun and endless days. Glass rippling in wooden frames, all soon to be ghosts on paths into dusk wending its way. This is your time to open the door, chipping its paint, kick off shoes, feel the boards beneath your feet. This is your time to hang a coat, make food, eat, wash dishes, finally sit and be still. The joke here is God worked 5 days, and the 6th he said, forget it. So here is our town that changes every day and so little. We are temporary, but it's our time to work too hard, too long, for too little, producing our yield a year, the exquisite march of the fleeting, reaching for flame or bloom. What happened here, cedar womb of nowhere, sigh of 100 years in a day? Welcome home. Welcome to start to end, hiring to firing, minute to lifetime, born into dying, what could have been and what is. The next 5 are from a section called Starving Slow, and it kind of says everything, I guess. Living with mother. Trouble has brought him like a child home again. Lost job, lost house, lost wife. And when his shoulders slump, it's the same to her as when he was a little boy, rejected by bigger boys for a game. She looks at his mouth, broken row of teeth, and it's the same to her as those midnights, slipping shiny quarters beneath his damp pillow. When he's drunk in the road, from a distance he could be learning to walk again. And his socks in her laundry basket are baseball games, bicycle rides, as dusk comes down and the lone street lamp comes on. His father, her husband, grumbles that he's a sponge, poaching their old age, giving too little for his stay, staying far too long. But the man always resented fatherhood. He's a big baby himself. He doesn't understand that this is the world's way of lifting time, tying it into a bow, handing it all back to her. Morning walk. Then a Copenhagen lid, extra long cut. It says satisfaction since 1822. meaning old Mr. Pogue might have bought a can, tucked a wad into his lip as he laid out the buildings of our town. Who knows when this sour can acquired the nickname Cope, as it most certainly allowed working men to do, just as we are walking now, trying to do the same thing. Spring. Across the street, the little house is empty now. Yellow signs taped to its front window. The woman has lost the house, though it sits right here, where it's always been, low-slung gray stucco with celery-colored trim. To the burning. The man who's been out of work since July walks the frozen alley, his dignity behind him, leashed and limping. Tea session and the end of a party. He was making $8 an hour. Keys to the burning, the alley, his hard road. The woman who turned out her daughter and bastard grandson forces her garden to purity, raking leaves so to teach them how to rot in the yard. She's to the burning, the petals of irises blue as her veins. The boy who sells books of coupons funding baseball practice enters his house through a window. Parents split, rotted apples, a vinegar flood to the ceiling, keys to the burning, the shadows of childhood claw his ankles. The preschooler in the yard, no more than 4, legs bare on the swing in freezing weather, cries from cold in her thin sweater. First introduction to winter. She's to the burning, her flaxen hair, cotton already aflame. And I to the burning my veins for feeding a black hole, a Hoover flag of a heart. To the burning, the blanket I knit for our union while this place flays me. So, a glass to the burning, all 24s feeling 40, those of saltine dinners, those of lentil and eviction, unable to sleep or to fold one quiet moment in a pocket, 1 minute whipped not to madness. So burning, the mad and the burning in what lowland or whose, burning in the dark night of high winter, when the ground goes indifferent and deadly to stone, we burning again. To open, easy as flowers, to scant light. There's a little hope in this, by the way. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. All right. This one is called White Snow. The scourge of the earth puts on his tennis shoes to take the dog for a walk. Together they move down the broken street into the orange groves, where their breath calms in the long, ordered rows. Both have a job here, to walk and breathe. On clearer days, he sees all the way to peaks covered still in late snow. If they just keep walking, him and the mutt, they could get there, the pure white line, dig down a little, and drink. And this is a slightly longer one, and it's the last one in this section, and then just 2 more after that. This one's called A Town Under 200. I miss you, great cauldron America, bubbling over your frontier fires, sure of your many recipes. I miss you, Paul Bunyan, flexing your mythic muscles, plowing behind Blue Babe, your statue by this country's square hotels and sailors fine 58 shark fins cruising clean cookie-cutter streets. I miss the irony of missing this, oh expensive taste of irony. Still, somewhere in far, grand houses line the roads, secure castles adorned with peonies and stone rabbits, verdigris children with baskets. I stroll visitor from the country, an anomaly in patched pants. My baby rides his tricycle, exploring acres of sidewalk, iridescent ribbons unwinding. He chases a white butterfly on those manicured lawns, his helmet blue and orange bouncing above his red cheek. Such a picture of throwback boy and butterfly. My heart splits and runs syrupy down my body, a puddle of prayer and fear. I'm in exile, America, from your sparkling sidewalks of suburbia. It's lonely here in the country. No jobs and faraway wars leaching blood through the lawn. On the blasted strip, I see women stealing shopping bags, children ripping packages. I hold the door for people who cruise through without speaking. I'm not yet 40, but don't understand you anymore. I am mourning the generation that existed in magazine photographs, frozen in tasteful moments in the most beautiful clothes. I'm mourning my town, my Mayberry, the train that came thundering to my door, releasing its laughing crowd, white chickens, Frigidaire, dainty gardening gloves, garden of my nostalgia, west side of my country's vast nostalgia for herself, rising and reeking now of gasoline, tar, walnuts and cracked melons, cantaloupe breasts heaving in methyl bromide and plastics. In a town under 200, the alley pulses with fear, the manse pulses with prayer. We are come home, toothless and broken. We are Billy fighting at night, punched at his chain link fence. We are Susie worshiping the moon, tying her menses to indifference. Figs have soured, not ripened, as our houses sag and flake. In a town under 200 where night never lifts, I sing to my baby, it's fine. Jackie Paper will come again. We'll see the grand shoulder of the great ox babe pushing clotted air back to the hills. This place again planted to flowers, roads again smoothly paved, petty four houses presented each in perfect green wrappers. To my mythic darling dancing at open banquets of desserts, no one hungry at the fences. Round the few in sherbet suits. No bare table at breakfast, bone white plates, shadowed bowls. This bare table of our wanting cannot last 10 years. Let it lance itself and run. Let it sweat itself healthy. Let it boil out to nothing, and us find ourselves again. These last two are from the final section in the book, and they're called Beautiful. The section is called Beautiful. So the last two. Beautiful. It's fall, and the old neighborhood dresses in finery given free. Each pomegranate tree bends red with fruit, taking us out of time. Are we Americans or Greeks, spinning our myths for the ages? Our worn jeans could be chitin, our thin sweaters Haitians. Air as crisp as a radish, though all we have are lemon trees, spiky and full of green fruit, hard as little grenades. The guy at the gas station says, "How you doing?" Then, minus irony, "Another day in paradise." Paradise, paradise, to live at all and anywhere, even in the shadow of Terminus and the listing picket fence of the neighbors. Another window broken every day is still paradise. Imagine the crash of rock, tinkle of shard, magnificent moment of breakage on the abandoned brick building that hosted so many parties, so much celebration, before to wrecking ball it fell in another magnificent crash. Every leaf, the nasty mulberry on duty to morning air, the plum tree, crooked and inhabited by ants, dons a dark green dress that flutters in the cool. So what if it's dying? One would never know from that stalwart trunk, memory of the last summer of plums. Crows croak and doves croon to themselves in the fig. The stovepipe lying flat on the neighbor's roof is charming, not a symbol of how we survive. It's time again to pull out the wreath we wove from cut vines of the arbor. Time to wrap it in ribbon, hang it on the nail in the door. Are still civilized, says the wreath. We are beautiful, says the espalier tree. We are alive, and God need not remind us today that there will be riches in heaven. And this is the last one in the section in his book, Picking Lemons. Up in the mean trees, on a 14-foot ladder, face under a bird nest, twigs biting my hands, mist rinsing a season's dust to exposed arms as last year's blossoms confetti my cap. Trees neither offer nor withhold. This year, a bumper crop, unlike last year's puny fruit. Hip bones and toes jut in the reaching. Fingers come back black with an oily grime. It is raining. It is quiet. The drops pleasing music. And it's me, rain, and orb. And this is not a job, as it is for so many. I don't want the fruit to fall, to hit earth with no worship. I want religion. Homage to the Lord of these inscrutable lemons. Homage to the master of the waxy leaf. Homage to the father of the moment suspended, high on the ladder, before the fall. Thank you.
Catherine Hodges loves teaching English and mentoring student writers at Porterville College, where her students have amazed and inspired her since 2001. Although she's been writing since she could hold a pencil, poetry didn't find her until she was almost 40. Catherine is the author of the poetry collection Instead of Sadness, winner of the 2015 Barry Spax Poetry Prize, and published by Gunpowder Press. Her poems have appeared in many literary journals and been featured on Verse Daily and the Writer's Almanac.
Actually, I just want to stop now and be quiet and then go home after all that we've had the opportunity to hear so far. I am of the opinion that poems need silence on either side of them. And Melissa, your reading was so beautiful. Excuse me. So, I don't think I can get away with going home right now, though. So we'll do some reading. Here's my plan, and I may alter it as I go. I'd like to read a few poems. I'd like to try to comment on some connections between poem writing and what we do in class, because I see a lot of people I know here, a lot of people from class. Let's hear it for extra credit, right? And I think there are some genuine connections that can be drawn. And then I'll read just a few more. A number of people have said, so how long did it take you to write that book? And there are a couple of answers. One is that I had no idea I was writing a book when I started writing these poems. And the other answer is it took 15 years. And it's a little book. It's 76 pages, 48 poems. But I wrote the first one before I knew where Porterville was. 1998. So I thought it might be interesting to, I'll read the first one and then I'll read the most recent one that appears in this book. The first one is called Stems. Lately, I catch myself less interested in flowers than in what precedes them. Those leggy necks, ribbed and weaving, wandering skyward, hilariously furred or sinewed or silken, metaphorical as serpents, durable as doves, monastic, capacious, muscular and umbilical as drinking straws, as question marks, submerged in molten earth, delivering answers that look for all the world like cornflowers. And I should have told you, a cornflower is a bachelor button. It's a little delicate blue flower. The most recent poem in this book was written in the spring of 2014. And it's called Ash Wednesday Morning. The fat candle in the kitchen window burns down like a rose spilling open. We light a scrap of paper from the flame, and with the ashes, a little olive oil, cross each other's foreheads. Margot's in the hospital again. Stop to see her on my way to school, go straight from there to class. My students have come from their night shifts at the nursing home and Walmart, from Mass, from dropping off the baby at daycare. They shuffle pages, share staplers. We look into each other's faces as they hand me their essays. Who knows how long we've got inside these dusty skins? We're burning down together, ashes mingling already. A fun thing for me about having my poems actually in a book is that people ask me questions, and then that makes me think. So a question that I had last week at Reedley College was, so why do you write poems? It was a great question, and I was kind of stumped because because I love to write poems, but really the answer, after I gave it some thought, is that poem making, and Catherine, I really liked what you said, referring to William Carlos Williams, about the making, the physical making, and I think of it that way. Poem making is, for me, how I hold still enough to engage deeply with my experience of being alive. I know that your life, and certainly my life, moves at such an incredible pace that it just goes by without my consideration unless I do something different. So for me, poem making is a way of listening, and in that way it is very akin to prayer for me. It is not efficient, it is not fast, it's not particularly practical, it's deeply counter to what our culture says we should be doing with our lives, and I find it absolutely vital as a practice. I'm going to read the title poem of this book, Instead of Sadness. If you've been in English 101 with me, 101A, you have written a research paper, and it's been about immigration. We've done that for years and years in my English 101A, and Lori Barker and I agree that every semester students come up with the most remarkable topics. And I'm sure that this poem is influenced by my experience with that, with those papers and you as my students for many years. Instead of sadness, I'm lying in the bathtub thinking about death, land that welcomes every immigrant, no questions asked, no quotas, no wall along the border. More and more of those I love, not to mention acquaintances and people I've only read about or seen on the news, have packed nothing and moved there. But I don't know. I have what's probably an irrational devotion to the mess I'm in right here, a lot of which I've made with my own hands. And I would miss my books, a couple of movies from the 90s, dollar stores. All I'm saying is, I think it warrants further thought. Something tells me, though, I'll meet you there sooner or later. You know my famous hunches. Remember Escondido, the green Volkswagen? I hear the wine is good. That's something. Word gets back. We'll find ourselves a rock in the sun, take turns reciting Berryman and Keats, maybe some Spender. You can do a little Dylan when the mood strikes. For now, though, it's a jumbled life, shabby, incandescent. From the bathtub, through the window, I can watch the stars come out. This poem is called How the Soul Feels, and it is after a poem by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Like a rowboat of wet sand at pond's edge in September. Like a feather on that pond and the ripples that run all the way to shore. It feels sequined, seared, alight, aloft. Feels like a song you remember from another life, then recall composing. Like an ear pressed to the heart of an hour inside, live now. I find that writing poems offers me an opportunity to dwell again on words and images, some of them from very, very long ago. So this goes back to first grade, and something my first grade teacher told me. And later, when my sister heard this poem, she said, "Oh, she told us that too." So apparently, generations of first graders heard this. This is called Letters from Birds. My first grade teacher told me, "Feathers are letters from birds." About that time, I knew a lady who wouldn't let her children touch feathers. "They can make you sick," she told them. No, I wanted to shout. But I was small and she was big. I wanted to tell her that feathers are letters from birds, and letters are made of words. And words, even then I knew this, words can make you well. So I don't want to take much more time because we do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. I do want to say, though, that as we do in our classes, some of these poems were revised for years and years and years. Only a few came pretty quickly. Ash Wednesday Morning came pretty quickly, and I revised it some, and then I knew it was done. But that's sort of a gift, and it's earned by many, many, many revisions of other poems. And Melissa Black and I essentially conducted peer review over many, many cups of tea. And so it was one of the reasons I feel emotional hearing her poems is that I know those poems. And almost every poem in this book has her touch because she read it and she responded. And sometimes she would read my poems aloud to me and vice versa so we could hear them. So I hope you hear echoes of what happens in peer review. That's not just a little exercise we do. That's how writers write. And here's something else. As I mentioned earlier, this did not start out as a book. It started to feel like a book in 2011 when I went away all by myself for a month and spent time with the poems already written and wrote many, many more poems. At that time, I had the experience of hearing the poems begin to talk to each other and want to be together under a cover. I had no idea what order they wanted to be in at that point, but this is what you're doing, right? When you're writing a research paper, you have sources. Now the difference is, you're the boss of the sources. If you know those sources well enough, then you get to conduct that conversation, and you do so in such a way that supports your point, that supports your thesis. Garcia, it's your turn to talk. And now, Smith, you come in and you support Garcia or you refute Garcia, but you are the boss because you're writing the research paper. I'm not the boss of my poems. They're smarter than I am. They know much more than I do. And so there's that distinction. But it's very much like working with a number of voices, a number of sources, and making choices. I will close with a couple of poems. One of the things I have learned, and I'm sure that every poet does once they've amassed sort of a body of work, we learn what we're obsessed with. And one of the things I have found that I am obsessed with, apparently, is those things that happen when I'm not looking. And because we're finite, that's the experience of being human. This is a poem called Everything Important, and the title flows right into the first line of the poem. Everything important happens behind my back. Water lilies open, then close. Nations are born, friends up and leave their sturdy bodies. The stone chat takes flight. A son learns to whistle. A daughter finds the greatest common factor, then falls in love. One morning the leaves are off the elm and halfway down the block, and in the spring, however faithfully I check for the first bloom along the secret alley of camellias, I will be looking away. We'll see them only once they're a jostling palaver of pink and white, so impossible a brightness, I will forget to be disappointed. And I'll close with a poem called How to Begin. Wipe the crumbs off the counter. Find the foxtail in the ear of the old cat. Work it free. Step into your rib cage. Feel the draft of your heart's doors as they open and close. Hidden latches cool in your hand. Hear your marrow keep silence, your blood sing. Finch talk in the bush outside the window. You're a small feather, winged seed, wisp of cotton. Thread yourself through a hole in the button on the sill. You're a strand of dark thread, stitching a word to a river, then another. Thank you. I want to say quickly how incredibly heartening it is to see people out for poetry and friendship and a little extra credit on a Friday night. And we do have time we have a little bit of time for some questions. So I would invite you to ask if you have questions. And if you'd like to address your questions to one of us in particular, please feel free. Lori Barker.
Just to let you know that the library has a copy that you can check out of Catherine Hodges' All the While, which was her first book, which she didn't mention. And we have a couple of copies probably of Instead of Sadness that you can check out. And I think they're available in the bookstore also.
And I believe Nick is keeping the bookstore open. Are you there, Nick? Yeah. So I think the bookstore's open and Instead of Sadness is there. Thank you, Nick.
And I also have a question. Where can we get Melissa's poems? How does the library get a copy?
It's kind of pushing the river here. Let's hear about this.
I'll have to think. I'll have to think
For $10,000, right?
Yeah. Well, I was
Deal.
thinking what Catherine said about the amount of time that it takes on poems, and as I mentioned, I started that project Terminus when the Great Recession was really in full swing, and I really was watching parts of the town I was in just disintegrate. So it's been a fair bit of time that I've been working on them. And the manuscript is like a living thing, you know, and as far as writing is concerned, you know, it kind of gets larger, and then I cut things out and it gets quite a bit smaller, and then it kind of grows again. So it's in progress, and I'll figure something out.
All right.
Maybe just a binder. We'll see. Thank you. Ellen.
Hi. Ms. Black obviously took inspiration, I would like to say, from her surroundings, from right where she is. Have you done something similar?
A lot of the poems in Instead of Sadness are ocean poems, and that is because that month that I took away was over on the coast in a little town called Cayucas. So in that sense, yes, I think my childhood surroundings are reflected in the book as well. But I'm not as place oriented in this book as Melissa's manuscript Terminus is. Thank you, Ellen. Question?
I might add to that. I trained as a journalist, and I started as a journalist, and I suppose in some respects I'm still working as one on the geography of poverty. But at the same time, I've always read and written poetry, so I guess this is sort of the two threads suddenly, you know, twining together. So that's the other thing. Sam, do you have any questions?
Oh, yeah.
Good job.
Please feel free to come find any of us on campus, and I think I can make that offer for Catherine, Jim, and Anne Marie. And does somebody still have a question?
I was just gonna ask you, and it may be limit, so tell me no if it is. I wanna know about Escondido.
Okay.
Since we're talking about places.
That's a really good question. My father wanted to know too. And I said,
Well,
the poet is never the speaker, no matter how close. I was lying in the bathtub thinking about death, and that's where that poem began. But Escondido, the green Volkswagen, I wanted that for voice.
I
So
see. Well, it piqued my curiosity.
That's fictional.
Melissa, for years I've known you as this wonderfully positive, always smiling, everything's always lifting. And your poetry is just, oh my goodness, gut-wrenching, painful. Is that how you keep your I was wondering, do you have all your pain?
Is that how I keep my what a good question. Well, I think that this particular project really had to deal with that because I think so much of the recession shocked us. You know, it was our pain, right? And the valley certainly suffered a disproportionate amount of that pain, I think. Although, from working on the geography of poverty, there are so many cities. Last summer we covered 70 cities that had higher than 20% poverty, meaning more than 20% of the population of that city lived below the poverty line, which is pretty significant. And in fact, something I've been working on right now, researching right now, is some of the great automotive centers in our country, or what were formerly our great automotive centers, right, Flint and Detroit, are crumbling into ruin, both in terms of things like their water, in Flint being poisoned, and they have 41% poverty in Flint. And what used to be a 200,000 person city is now 100,000. 80,000 of that 200 used to work at Buick City. That is no more, right? So I felt very much required, I guess is the word. I felt required to respond to what I was seeing in Lemon Cove, but then also in a larger sense, I guess. So, but that last section of the project called Beautiful, it's more than two pieces. I mean, there's more along those lines. But in order to paint a picture tonight, I felt that the middle part, the starving slow section, was the part that, you know, needed the time. Yeah, thank you.
I hear so much of the theme in the poetry about what was happening, and I just wondered, did you ever find yourself also writing poems that were angry?
Wow. I don't know. Yes, I guess so. They didn't, I think, you know, one interesting thing coming back to the writing process is that some poems might come out, right? But then they don't come out, meaning they don't really end up working as poetry. They end up working as something else, maybe an idea that you're thinking through in order to get it into a poem. So poems that were angry, yeah, there were some, but they didn't make it really, I don't think, into the pieces that at least not that I read tonight. In other sections of the book, yeah, there are some that are pretty angry and maybe even a little finger pointy, right, toward those that helped the recession to happen and who didn't do much to help people who were suffering. And there still are so many people, you know, suffering. Yeah, thanks.
I also think, Melissa, that those poems, what they do for your listener and your reader, they lead us to a sort of almost a righteous indignation, and also a sense of maybe of being complicit to some extent. So some of the anger, I think, my experience of Melissa's poems is that I feel anger as I listen or as I read
For the characters.
For the characters, yes.
Yeah, it feels like there's some transformation that's channeled into that very intense observation.
I was going to say the black tar and oil and the plastic, and I know your history with plastic. So I thought, you know, that's where I picked up the anger. And it reminded me of Langston Hughes, where sometimes the anger's on the surface, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's brimming right under the surface, and you feel the effect of it, but it's not on the surface of the poem.
Yeah. Well, and Lemon Cove is a really amazing place. I don't live there anymore. We moved 20 miles away, but I feel really strong affinity for that place. And it's a place with a really intense history, a really illustrious history almost. There used to be a train that ran from Visalia to Lemon Cove. The Women's Building, if you ever go around that curve, used to be a functioning hotel. There was a big brick school. All of those things are gone, including the brick building that I told you about that in the poem that was, met the wrecking ball. So it's become a shadow of itself, and some of the things, like the found poem that I opened with, was an actual historic document talking about the valley. And so I suppose if there's some anger coming through it, it's about those things, misuse of the landscape. You can't drink the water in Lemon Cove. It's full of nitrates, which is true for many places in the valley. So I suppose that's where some of it comes through, is that factory element. And yet at the same time, that's the thing that provides for us here. So we can't condemn it entirely.
So, thanks everybody for reading. I'm not a student here, so I don't recall all the speakers' names, but the gentleman spoke about the Indian graveyard underneath the lake. You're speaking about a little bit later in the history of that same area and Lemon Cove. I wonder if you can maybe share a little bit of your experience about how those might be tied together.
Well, the name of the dam, Terminus Dam, comes from there was a beach there, Terminus Beach, and that was also a popular, site for locals to go up and swim in and so on. On that side, the south side of the river, that beach was near where the graveyard was, and the village was nearby there as well. It just so happened the dam was located right on that spot, and so it became a pretty deep covering over that area. I don't know if that helps.
It was a very nice.
I thought it. Because you're seeing it from the wall of the dam on the other side.
Yes, on the other side. Although what's interesting about Lemon Cove too, as I mentioned, much of it was really flourishing between around 1868 to up into the 1920s and 30s. And it was built in a spot where the water didn't affect that spot. In other words, it's the perfect place to grow lemons. It's the one of the few places where you can make it work with hardly any effort. And so a lot of the old houses there, the historic buildings, those were there before the dam, and they weren't flooded. They never flooded. They were chosen well. And I guess that's one of the other things in the poems and in the larger project is the care that was taken by the people who put the place together, the hopes for the place, all of which really were dashed over time. The water becoming poisoned, the landscape becoming ruined, and then finally these larger forces coming to bear on the people. Those three things.
I have a question.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Sure. This question's coming from my son, actually. He said, have I written any pieces about some of the places that his dad, my husband, Matt, went to? Because in our project, my husband traveled to 70 cities across the course of the summer, last summer. And I did research and captioning and also, so we're working together on this project. So the question was, have I written any poems yet about some of these places? And yes, I'm writing about Flint. Yeah.
I have a question for Jim. There are many authors authors, that I can think of who are also visual artists. I know you are now, as of today. And I'm just wondering what kind of connections you see between those arts, or why you channel some things poetry and other things visual arts. I mean, do you make a conscious choice, or does it just come out that way?
I'm an active journaler, but it comes out in images and in writing, and so I continue to come up with poems. To me, poetry has a visual aspect, a spatial aspect to it, I think. When I'm working, sometimes it comes out in that way, sometimes it comes out in visual imagery. I did a series called 36 Views of Blossom Peak, which is right in Three Rivers above this area, but it was looking at the whole region, the area, and I started to research the Yokuts' role in this as a result of that. So there was a lot of writing as well as paintings coming out of that, and they were all a part of this show that I had in Fresno. So I look at myself as an artist, and sometimes it comes out in words, and sometimes it comes out in imagery, and that's the way it is. You know?
I was just curious. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Well, I don't know about you, but I feel very fortunate to be in Porterville tonight. So many of our poets